President Trump tweeted, we start a lot of sentences like that these days. He tweeted to blast congressional Democrats over special counsel Robert Mueller's testimony last week. Among other tweets, the president said, quote, "The Democrats lost so big, their party is in shambles right now," end quote. Twitter is one of the president's favorite platforms, and he uses it a lot. So we wondered, what's the effect of that? Are voters really moved? We're asking University of Wisconsin journalism professor Mike Wagner, who studies political communication. He's at our Madison affiliate WKOW-TV. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So you're an expert in political communication. We see politicians tweeting a lot, not only the president, but also at the local level. Is there any evidence that these tweets have influence on voters?
Well, there are a few ways that these tweets can influence voters. One is directly, so people who follow politicians in their Twitter feeds, and these tend to be folks who are really interested in politics and using Twitter. So that's a pretty small subset of the population to begin with, but those folks tend to follow those tweets, pay attention to them, and tend to follow their side more than anything. And so one effect is that it can kind of grow or exacerbate partisan polarization. They're hearing from politicians on their side, they're agreeing with that, they're coming to see the other side as less trustworthy, less willing, or less able to be compromised with, and that sort of thing. And then the indirect way is that politicians tweeting can also get greater attention from the news media. And so people can learn more about what politicians are doing when the news media cover their tweets. Some folks like President Trump are extraordinarily good at this. Research we've done at the University of Wisconsin, led by Chris Wells, found that the more President Trump went on a tweet storm and people in his network retweeted his messages, the more news coverage he got, which then amplified that message to people who don't follow him on Twitter.
Oh, that's really interesting research there. And so you said that people who sort of already like one side, that's the side that they will follow on social media. So do minds ever get changed, you think, through social media posts, or is it just kind of cementing what people already believe?
Well, persuasion is hard, and so it can take a few different routes. So people following politicians are probably not normally persuaded by the politicians that they follow on Twitter. However, people who have a wide range of kinds of people they follow on social media, so the person who follows liberals and conservatives and moderates and people who don't care at all about politics, people who have a social media feed like that are actually more likely to be less polarized in their attitudes, more likely to split their tickets when they vote. We found this kind of thing in the research we do and the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at UW-Madison. People who have a wide-ranging media diet, including social media, are less polarized, and those who have a more narrowly focused kind of echo chambery media diet are more polarized.
According to the Pew Research Center, I looked this up, they say about 79% of Americans who go online use Facebook, 24% of Americans who go online use Twitter. How is social media going to play a role in 2020, do you think?
I think one way it will play a role is that it will be a way that people running for president and including the president himself, can try to jump over the news media and communicate directly with voters, but also communicate with reporters in an environment that makes it really hard for journalists to ask follow-up questions. And so we'll see candidates tweet things and try to get a cycle of stories about that, and then maybe get the interview later and get a second news story out of the reaction or the follow-up questions to the tweets. And then the other way it can matter is that the volume of Twitter chatter, the kinds of things that go viral and catch fire in the public, can also be things that kind of seep into our own feeds and our own regular lives, but also drive some news coverage and alter the agendas that are on our minds when we're thinking about who it is we want to vote for.
And the university is going to ramp up efforts to study information and polarization. Why?
Well, we find ourselves in a pretty interesting and important time in American history where the people I work with are arguing that the state of our democracy is somewhat fractured, and it's far more polarized than it typically is. In Wisconsin, fully a third of people say they've stopped talking to someone about politics because of their views about Act 10, which took place several years ago. And about 10% of Wisconsinites say they've actually ended a friendship or a relationship with a family member because of political discussion. And so to see politics seep into regular life to that degree is pretty unique. And so we want to understand, how did Wisconsin get this way? How did it get so polarized and so fractured? And what kinds of things can we do? What kinds of things can reporters do, academics, politicians? What can people do to help bring people together, to foster more support for compromise across party lines and a more engaging, robust civic life? And so that's really the agenda we have with the work that we're doing going forward.
Okay, well, good luck with your study, and we're definitely interested in following up when you find some more information. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Next, the local host committee helping to stage the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee, why they are not talking about President Trump. And later, those annoying spam robocalls, we all get them, how Congress is trying to stop them.